Lieutenant Colonel Tadashi Nakajima sat in the briefing room at Naremasu Airfield on February 16, 1945, and laughed at the intelligence report. American fighters escorting B-29s to Tokyo? Impossible. The math didn't work. Iwo Jima was 660 nautical miles from the Japanese mainland. No single-engine fighter possessed that range. Not the P-47 Thunderbolt, not the P-38 Lightning. Certainly not that silver toy the Americans called the P-51 Mustang. Nakajima had flown Zeros since 1942. He'd fought over the Solomons, the Philippines, Formosa. He knew American fighters, heavy, fast in a dive, helpless in a turning fight. They burned easily. Their pilots relied on speed and altitude, running when confronted with Japan's A6M0, the fighter that had dominated Pacific skies for 3 years. The Zero turned tighter than physics should allow, climbed faster than American pilots believed possible, and carried a 20mm cannon that could shred a B-29's wing with a single burst. In Nakajima's experienced hands, it was a scalpel. American fighters were hammers. Everyone knew hammers don't catch scalpels. But the report persisted. Reconnaissance claimed to have spotted long-range fighters near Iwo Jima. Nakajima dismissed it. Probably P-38s on a one-way suicide mission, or perhaps reconnaissance aircraft misidentified as fighters. The Americans were desperate. Their B-29 losses over Tokyo exceeded 5% per mission. Unacceptable mathematics for the Americans, who valued their air crews more than their objectives. The B-29s came at 30,000 feet, above the effective ceiling of most Japanese fighters. The Zeros had to climb for 40 minutes, gasping for air in the thin atmosphere, their engines losing power with every 1,000 feet. By the time they reached the bombers, fuel ran critically low. They got one pass, maybe two, before diving for home. The Americans knew this. They timed their bombing runs to maximize Japanese fuel anxiety. It was a war of mathematics and endurance, and Japan was losing both. But fighters? Escort fighters over Tokyo. Nakajima checked the report date. February 16th, 1945. Iwo Jima remained in Japanese hands, barely, its garrison commander sending increasingly desperate messages about Marines landing on the southern beaches. Even if the Americans captured the island tomorrow, building a fighter base required months. Engineer battalions, fuel depots, ammunition dumps, repair facilities. Nakajima knew airfield logistics. He'd seen it in China, in the Philippines. Months. The intelligence officer insisted, "They're coming today, sir. 1,300 hours. B-29s with escort fighters." Nakajima stood and addressed his pilots. 23 men, most under 25 years old, half with less than 50 flight hours. The veterans were dead. Guadalcanal, Rabaul, the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American fighters had massacred Japanese naval aviation so thoroughly that carrier operations effectively ceased. These boys learned to fly on fumes. Japan's fuel reserves dropped below critical levels months ago. Each training flight burned gasoline the home islands couldn't spare. They flew Zeros with unpainted aluminum surfaces to save weight. They flew without radios to save weight. They flew without armor plating, without self-sealing fuel tanks, without parachutes because Japanese pilots didn't retreat. The Zero philosophy: maximum performance, minimum protection. It worked brilliantly in 1942 when Japanese pilot skill vastly exceeded American competence. In 1945, with skilled pilots dead and fuel scarce, it became a flying death trap. But it could still turn. God, could it turn? In a turning fight, the Zero remained unmatched. Let the Americans come. At Iwo Jima, 660 nautical miles south, Captain Robert W. Moore of the 15th Fighter Group checked his fuel gauges one final time. 269 gallons internal, 165 gallons in 2 external drop tanks, 434 gallons total. His P-51D Mustang, serial number 44-14733, nickname Contrary Mary, burned 70 gallons per hour at cruise power. 6 hours endurance. The mission profile allowed for 3.5 hours to Tokyo, 15 minutes over target, 3.5 hours back. 30 minutes reserve. Zero margin for error. Zero tolerance for combat maneuvering that burned fuel like a bonfire. Zero forgiveness for headwinds or navigation errors. Moore had flown P-51s since August 1944 in Europe. He knew the aircraft intimately. Designed in 1940 by North American Aviation, the P-51 originally mounted an Allison engine and performed adequately at low altitude, mediocre at best. The British suggested installing a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Everything changed. The Packard-built Merlin 5 1650 produced 1,490 horsepower and transformed the P-51 from adequate to exceptional. Speed, 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet. Range, with external tanks, over 1,600 miles. The Germans learned to fear it over Berlin. Now Japan would learn over Tokyo. 72 P-51s from 3 fighter groups, the 15th, 21st, and 506th, formed up over Iwo Jima at 11:45 hours on February 16, 1945. Iwo's conquest remained incomplete. Marines fought yard by yard through volcanic ash and underground tunnels, while Seabees carved a usable runway from the carnage. The escort mission launched from this half-finished base, P-51s threading between artillery impacts and supply trucks. The fighters carried no external ordnance except fuel. Empty gun bays except for 6.50 caliber machine guns, 1,880 rounds total. 400 rounds per inboard gun, 270 per outboard. Every ounce counted. Every pound of weight reduced range. Engineers calculated precisely. Maximum fuel, maximum ammunition, minimum everything else. The mission profile demanded perfection. Moore's wingman, Second Lieutenant James O. Tapp, had 40 hours in the P-51. 40 hours. In Europe, Moore wouldn't fly with anyone under 200 hours. But this was the Pacific in 1945, where experienced pilots died faster than training commands produced replacements. Tapp was 22 years old, scared and honest about both. Moore preferred that to the overconfident fools who thought 50 hours made them aces. The formation climbed to 5,000 feet and turned north. Navigation fell to Major James Tapp, no relation to Moore's wingmen, flying a specially equipped lead aircraft with extra radio equipment. Dead reckoning across 660 miles of open ocean with no landmarks, no radio beacons, only compass headings and fuel calculations. An error of 2 degrees meant missing Tokyo by 40 miles. Missing Tokyo meant running out of fuel over the Pacific. The ocean didn't care about navigation errors. At 12:15 hours, they passed the point of no return. Fuel remaining exceeded fuel required to return to Iwo Jima by less than 10 minutes. They were committed. Moore checked his instruments for the 15th time. Engine temperature, normal. Oil pressure, normal. Fuel flow, exactly 70 gallons per hour. The Merlin purred smoothly at 2,050 RPM. Propeller governors maintaining constant speed. Mixture leaned for maximum efficiency. Every pilot flew identical power settings. Deviation meant wasted fuel. Wasted fuel meant swimming. The B-29s they escorted flew a different mathematics. 73 superfortresses from 21st Bomber Command, each carrying 7 tons of incendiary bombs, cruised at 28,000 feet. Their targets, Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory at Oda and the Tokyo urban area. The B-29 represented American industrial supremacy made airborne, 4 Wright R3350 engines producing 2,200 horsepower each, pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, 5,000-mile range. It cost $639,000 per aircraft, more than a destroyer. The B-29 program cost more than the Manhattan Project. America built them anyway. 3,970 aircraft total, because America's industrial capacity exceeded Japan's by a factor of 10. Japan knew this. Japanese planners calculated before Pearl Harbor that America's production would overwhelm Japan by 1944. They gambled on a quick victory, forcing a negotiated peace before American industry reached full mobilization. They lost the gamble. Now B-29s burned Japanese cities nightly, untouchable, unstoppable, protected by altitude and distance. Until today. At 1340 hours, the Japanese radar station at Mount Tsukuba detected the incoming formation. 73 heavy bombers, speed 220 miles per hour, altitude 28,000 feet, bearing 180 degrees. The radar operator noted something unusual. Additional contacts, smaller, faster, at 25,000 feet. Fighters. Actual fighters, not reconnaissance aircraft or wishful thinking. The operator double-checked his equipment. Radar didn't lie. He telephoned the alert to Narimasu Airfield. Lieutenant Colonel Nakajima received the report at 1347 hours. Fighters. American fighters over Tokyo. Impossible mathematics had become impossible reality. He sprinted to his Zero. 23 aircraft scrambled immediately. Engines coughed to life. Mechanics pulling wheel chocks as pilots strapped in. The Nakajima Sakai radial engine produced 940 horsepower, respectable in 1942, inadequate in 1945. The Zero weighed 5,313 pounds empty, 6,164 pounds loaded. Power-to-weight ratio, 0.15 horsepower per pound. The P-51D weighed 7,125 pounds empty, 10,100 pounds loaded with external tanks. Power to weight, 0.147 horsepower per pound, nearly identical on paper, radically different in practice. The Zero's Sakai lost power rapidly above 20,000 feet. The Merlin's supercharger maintained power to 30,000 feet. At 25,000 feet, the P-51 possessed a 75 horsepower advantage. At 30,000 feet, the advantage exceeded 200 horsepower. Nakajima didn't know this. Japanese intelligence focused on maneuverability, on turning radius, on the fighter pilot's sacred duty to engage in close combat. Nakajima climbed, expecting another routine interception. Americans at altitude, one slashing past, dive for home. Captain Moore spotted the first Zeros at 1351 hours, 12 contacts, 2,000 feet below, climbing aggressively. He keyed his radio. Bandits, 3 o'clock low, climbing. The formation leader ordered 4 flights to engage. Moore pushed his stick forward, gaining speed, 350 miles per hour, 400, 450. Airspeed indicator needle climbing. The P-51 accelerated like a falling anvil. Moore selected his target, a Zero climbing in a lazy turn, pilot scanning for bombers, not expecting fighters to dive from above. Classic mistake. Moore closed to 400 yards, 300 yards. The Zero pilot saw him too late, snapped into a hard turn. Moore didn't follow. He fired a 3-second burst, 180 rounds, and pulled up. Tracers walked across the Zero's fuselage. The unarmored fuel tank exploded. The aircraft disintegrated. Pilot dead before he processed what happened. Moore climbed back to altitude, checking his fuel. The dive and climb burned 15 gallons. Acceptable, barely. Lieutenant Tapp engaged his first Zero at 1353 hours. The Japanese pilot saw him coming and turned hard left. Tapp followed instinctively. Terrible mistake. The Zero turned inside the P-51's radius easily, gaining position, lining up a shot. Tapp realized his error too late. The Zero's 20mm cannon fired. Shells exploded across Tapp's left wing, punching holes through aluminum skin, severing control cables. Tapp shoved the throttle forward and dove. The P-51's overwhelming power advantage saved him. The Zero couldn't follow a full throttle dive without its wings ripping off. Maximum dive speed for a Zero, 410 miles per hour. Maximum dive speed for a P-51, 505 miles per hour. Tapp hit 480 miles per hour in 6 seconds and pulled away. His left aileron responded sluggishly. Fuel streamed from punctured lines. He'd survive only if he reached Iwo Jima before fuel exhaustion. The mathematics looked grim. Nakajima spotted a P-51 at 1355 hours and attacked with the confidence of 3 years' combat experience. He positioned perfectly, closed to 200 meters, fired his 20mm cannon. The American aircraft seemed not to notice. It simply accelerated away, gaining 100 meters in seconds, climbing at an angle the Zero couldn't match. Nakajima pushed his throttle to maximum power. The Sakai engine screamed in protest. His airspeed increased marginally. The American aircraft disappeared into the sun, climbing effortlessly. Nakajima's aircraft shuddered at the edge of a stall. He dropped the nose, regained airspeed, looked for another target. 3 Zeros were burning wrecks falling toward Tokyo. He'd been in combat for 4 minutes. The battle devolved into chaos. American fighters refused to dogfight. They attacked from altitude, made one pass, climbed away using superior power. Japanese pilots tried desperately to force turning engagements where the Zero's legendary maneuverability meant something. The Americans declined. They fought with mathematics, energy management, power-to-weight ratios, climb rates. The Zero pilots fought with heart, courage, determination, willingness to die. Heart lost to horsepower. Moore splashed his second Zero at 13:58 hours. A young pilot, maybe 19, tried to climb after Moore's wingman. Moore dove from 28,000 feet, built speed to 460 miles per hour, closed to 300 yards, fired a 2-second burst. The Zero's unarmored structure couldn't withstand 6.50 caliber machine guns. American ordnance doctrine, overwhelming firepower. 6 guns, 1,880 rounds, every 5th round a tracer. A 2-second burst put 120 rounds into the target zone. The Zero's pilot died instantly, aircraft tumbling through the sky, disintegrating from structural failure before hitting the ground. At 14:02 hours, the B-29s reached their initial point. Bombardiers activated their Norden bomb sites. The targets lay below. Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory at Ota, visible through broken clouds, and Tokyo's densely packed urban districts. The B-29s opened their bomb bays. Incendiary clusters tumbled out, 7 tons per aircraft, 511 tons total. The clusters separated at 5,000 feet, scattering thousands of individual bomblets across a 1 square mile target area. Each bomblet contained jellied gasoline and white phosphorus. Tokyo's construction, wood frames, paper walls, bamboo, burned magnificently. American fire experts had studied Japanese urban architecture for months, calculating optimal incendiary composition. They'd built a complete Japanese village at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, tested various incendiary combinations, determined that M69 clusters produced maximum destruction. Science applied to urban conflagration. The B-29s dropped their loads and turned for home. Mission time over target, 12 minutes. Not a single bomber damaged by Japanese fighters. The P-51s had done their job, but the fighters themselves paid a price. Fuel gauges showed critically low levels. The combat maneuvering, dives, climbs, maximum power settings, burned fuel at 3 times cruise consumption. Moore checked his gauges, 85 gallons remaining. He needed 220 gallons to reach Iwo Jima. The mathematics said he was dead. Every pilot in the formation faced identical arithmetic. The mission plan assumed minimal combat, cruise power settings, optimal fuel consumption. Combat reality destroyed those assumptions. Moore keyed his radio. "Playtime's over. Form up, head south, lean everything out." The P-51s formed a loose gaggle and turned toward Iwo Jima. Moore reduced power to 1,850 RPM, leaned his mixture until the engine ran rough, then enriched it 1 click. His Merlin consumed 55 gallons per hour, well below optimal cruise settings. The engine temperature climbed into the yellow arc. Moore didn't care. Heat wouldn't kill him in the next hour. Fuel exhaustion would. Lieutenant Tapp's P-51 leaked fuel steadily. His gauges showed 62 gallons at 14:10 hours. He calculated silently, 62 gallons at 55 gallons per hour equals 67 minutes of flight time. Distance to Iwo Jima, 660 nautical miles. Ground speed at reduced power, 280 miles per hour, approximately 244 nautical miles per hour. Flight time required, 2.7 hours, 162 minutes. He had fuel for 67 minutes. he would ditch 95 minutes short of Iwo Jima. The Pacific Ocean temperature was 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time in immersion, 6 to 8 hours, assuming sharks didn't arrive first. Rescue probability, effectively zero. The Pacific covered 64 million square miles. A pilot in a life raft was a grain of sand on a beach. Tap tightened his shoulder harness and flew on. What else could he do? Nakajima landed at Narimasu at 14:25 hours with 11 gallons of fuel remaining. 13 aircraft returned from the scramble of 23. 10 pilots dead. 3 bailed out successfully and would return to duty after recovery. Nakajima's ground crew met him with haunted expressions. The intelligence officer approached with a new report. American fighters had shot down 17 Japanese aircraft over Tokyo in 14 minutes of combat. Not a single B-29 damaged. The Americans lost 2 fighters, one to ground fire, one to a successful zero engagement. The mathematics told a devastating story. Japanese pilots attacked with courage bordering on suicide. American pilots fought with overwhelming technical superiority and declined disadvantageous engagements. The Zero's legendary turning ability meant nothing when American fighters refused to turn. Nakajima wrote his after-action report in careful characters. He documented the P-51's performance: speed, climb rate, diving capability, firepower. He noted the Americans' tactics: slash and climb, refuse turning combat, exploit power advantage. He concluded with a professional assessment. Enemy fighters demonstrate complete superiority above 20,000 feet. Current Japanese fighter assets cannot effectively intercept high-altitude bomber formations if enemy escort fighters are present. Recommend concentrating defensive efforts at lower altitudes or developing higher performance interceptors immediately. The report climbed the command chain. Staff officers read it, acknowledged it, filed it. Japan didn't have higher performance fighters. Japanese industry couldn't develop them fast enough. The Nakajima Ki-84 and Kawasaki Ki-100 showed promise, but reached operational units in insufficient numbers. Japan's industrial capacity, already stretched to breaking, couldn't match American production. America built 15,000 P-51s. Japan built 10,939 Zeros across all variants for the entire war. America was building P-51s faster than Japan could shoot them down. The mathematics were existential. Moore's P-51 sputtered at 15:07 hours. The engine coughed once, twice, resumed running. Fuel exhaustion imminent. His gauges read empty. The engine ran on vapor and momentum. Moore's altimeter showed 3,000 feet. Iwo Jima lay ahead, maybe 15 miles. Visible on the horizon, tantalizingly close, impossibly far. His engine quit completely at 15:09 hours. The propeller windmilled in the slipstream, useless. Moore trimmed for best glide speed, 120 miles per hour, and aimed for Iwo Jima. Radio towers on Mount Suribachi provided a navigation reference. Marines still fought on that mountain, raising flags, dying for volcanic ash that would save Moore's life if he glided far enough. 3,000 feet altitude, 15 miles distance, that was a glide ratio of 1 to 26. The P-51's best glide ratio was 1 to 15. Moore wasn't going to make the runway. He'd ditch short, maybe a mile offshore. The mathematics were pitiless. At 15:12 hours, at 800 feet altitude, 5 miles from Iwo Jima, his Merlin coughed back to life. Fuel pooled in some corner of the tank had found the feed line. The engine ran for 45 seconds, enough to add 600 feet of altitude and a mile of distance. Then it quit again, permanently. Moore glided across the shoreline at 200 feet, far short of the runway, heading for the crude taxiway Seabees had carved through ash. He touched down in volcanic sand at 95 miles per hour, far too fast, no runway left. The P-51 ground-looped violently, left gear collapsing, left wing striking the ground, aircraft spinning 180 degrees before stopping. Moore sat motionless for 10 seconds, confirming he wasn't dead. His aircraft was destroyed. He was alive on Iwo Jima. A Marine combat engineer ran up, looked at the wreckage, looked at Moore climbing out. "Nice parking, Captain." Moore laughed, slightly hysterical. He'd flown 1,320 miles, shot down 2 enemy fighters, and crash-landed with 0 fuel. He'd survived. Lieutenant Tapp ditched at 14:58 hours, 120 miles south of Iwo Jima. His engine quit without drama. The propeller stopped. The aircraft became a glider with increasingly limited options. Tapp followed his training. Wheels up, flaps down, trim for 85 miles per hour, ditch parallel to ocean swells. He aimed for a trough between waves and hit perfectly. The P-51 skipped once, nose down hard, decelerated from 85 miles per hour to 0 in 3 seconds. The impact smashed Tapp forward into his instrument panel. His shoulder harness held, but his head struck the gun sight. He tasted blood. Salt water poured through the canopy seal. Tapp pulled the canopy release. It jammed. Seawater reached his chest. He kicked the canopy release with both feet. It popped free. He pulled himself through the opening as the aircraft sank. His life raft deployed automatically. He dragged himself into it, bleeding from a scalp laceration, ribs screaming. The P-51 sank in 15 seconds. Tapp sat in his raft, alone on the Pacific, 120 miles from the nearest land. Survival probability approached 0. He activated his emergency radio beacon anyway. What else could he do? At 15:34 hours, a Navy PBY, Catalina Flying Patrol, southeast of Iwo Jima, detected Tapp's beacon. The PBY altered course, spotted the raft, landed nearby. Crew members pulled Tapp aboard. He'd been in the water 36 minutes. The PBY's pilot noted Tapp's condition: concussion, possible broken ribs, severe shock, and flew directly to Iwo Jima's field hospital. Tapp survived. 71 P-51s launched from Iwo Jima that morning. 68 returned or were rescued. 3 pilots died, 2 from fuel exhaustion ditchings without rescue, 1 from ground fire over Tokyo. The mission was considered an overwhelming success. The bomber crews certainly thought so. On February 19th, 3 days later, 120 P-51s escorted B-29s to Tokyo again. Japanese fighters rose to meet them. The results were identical. American fighters splashed Japanese interceptors without losing bombers. On February 25th, 172 P-51s escorted the mission. On March 9th, the massive firebombing raid that killed 100,000 Tokyo civilians received full fighter escort. Japanese pilots attacked with suicidal determination. American pilots shot them down with methodical efficiency. The 0 could still turn. Turning meant nothing when the enemy refused to turn with you. Nakajima flew through March 1945, watching his squadron dissolve. Replacement pilots arrived with 30 hours total flight time. They died on their first missions. By April, Japan's fighter pilot training program effectively ceased. Fuel exhaustion prevented training flights. The pilots defending Japan possessed less flight time than American ferry pilots delivering new P-51s from California. The mathematics had become absurd. The P-51's presence over Japan destroyed the strategic logic of Japan's air defense. Previously, B-29s flew alone, vulnerable only during the bombing run, protected by altitude and speed during approach and departure. Japanese fighters climbed, made one pass, dove away before fuel exhaustion. This tactic inflicted acceptable losses, 3 to 5% per mission. Painful, but survivable. Escort fighters changed everything. Japanese pilots had to fight through the P-51s before reaching bombers. Fighting P-51s burned fuel prodigiously. By the time Zeros reached the bombers, fuel reserves ran critically low. They got perhaps one pass before fuel considerations forced withdrawal. Often they never reached the bombers at all. P-51s shot them down during the climb. The bomber losses dropped to less than 1% per mission. American bomber crews noticed. Morale soared. Previously, a B-29 crew expected to die after 15 missions. Simple statistical probability. With fighter escort, they expected to survive their full 35-mission tour. The mathematics shifted from "when will I die" to "I might actually make it home." Japanese industry felt the consequences immediately. The Nakajima Aircraft Engine Factory at Oda, bombed February 16th, never resumed full production. Subsequent raids hit it repeatedly. By April, production dropped to 30% of capacity. The Mitsubishi Heavy Industries plant at Nagoya suffered identical fate. The Kawasaki plant at Akashi burned completely. American industrial targeting doctrine focused on bottleneck facilities, the specialized factories that produced irreplaceable components. Aircraft engines were such components. Japan's aircraft production depended on 3 major engine manufacturers. Destroy the engine plants, and airframe production became irrelevant. The B-29 raids, protected by P-51 escorts, systematically destroyed Japan's aircraft engine production capability. Japanese aircraft production peaked in September 1944 at 2,572 aircraft. By April 1945, production fell to 1,500. By July, production dropped to 700. Not from lack of airframes or pilots. Japan had trained pilots, had aluminum, had desperate willingness to build aircraft. But aircraft without engines were sculptures. The P-51 escorts enabled the precision daylight bombing that destroyed the engine plants. Japanese fighters couldn't prevent it. They tried. God knows they tried. They flew knowing they were mathematically doomed. They flew anyway because they were ordered to fly, because not flying was unthinkable. Japanese military culture demanded combat to the death. The pilots complied. They died. By May 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Nakajima commanded 6 operational aircraft and 4 pilots capable of flying them. His unit designation remained on paper: 244th Fighter Sentai, strength 24 aircraft. Reality: 6 aircraft, 4 pilots, fuel for perhaps 3 more missions. The Americans bombed Tokyo daily now. Nakajima watched B-29s pass overhead in formations of 500 aircraft, escorted by swarms of P-51s, utterly untouchable. He didn't scramble. What was the point? 6 zeros against 200 fighters. Mathematics. His pilots would die achieving nothing. On May 23rd, orders arrived. Prepare for special attack operations. Nakajima understood. His surviving pilots would become kamikaze. The Zero, once Japan's premier fighter, symbol of aerial supremacy, had been relegated to suicide weapon. Too obsolete for conventional combat, still functional enough to crash into targets. The mathematics made terrible sense. A properly trained fighter pilot required 2 years and enormous resources to create. Japan no longer possessed 2 years or resources. A kamikaze required 3 weeks training. Point at target, dive, die. Even marginal pilots could do that. Nakajima composed a final letter to his wife. He didn't mention the P-51 by name. He didn't need to. She would understand from the silences, from the careful omissions. Japanese censorship prohibited defeatist statements. Nakajima wrote, "The Americans have developed new tactics we cannot adequately counter with current resources. Our pilots fight with traditional courage. The enemy fights with numerical and technical advantages that exceed our capacity to overcome." It was the closest he could come to truth. The Zero was obsolete. Japan had lost air superiority permanently. The war was mathematically unwinnable. He sealed the letter and prepared for his final mission. Captain Moore flew 37 escort missions over Japan between February and August 1945. He achieved 5 confirmed kills, 3 Zeros, 1 Kai 84, 1 Ki 61. He survived the war, returned to Texas, never spoke much about it. In 1981, a Japanese documentary team located him and requested an interview. They'd spoken with Tadashi Nakajima, who survived his kamikaze mission through mechanical failure that forced return to base before reaching the target. The war ended 3 days later. Nakajima agreed to meet Moore. They sat in a Houston hotel room, 2 old men, translator between them. Moore asked about the Zero's performance. Nakajima described the aircraft with obvious affection: the responsiveness, the climbing ability, the ethereal handling. "It was beautiful," Nakajima said. "It turned like a dream. In 1942, nothing could match it." Moore nodded. By 1945? Nakajima looked at his hands. By 1945, turning didn't matter. You had power. You had numbers. You had fuel. We had courage, which proved insufficient. Moore didn't disagree. What could he say? It was true. The P-51 flew escort missions over Japan for 6 months, February through August 1945. In that period, American bombers dropped 147,000 tons of bombs on Japanese cities and industrial targets. Japanese fighter opposition declined from 500 sorties per month in February to less than 50 per month by July. American bomber losses dropped from 5.1% in December 1944 to 0.4% by June 1945. The P-51 groups claimed 877 Japanese aircraft destroyed in air combat, another 423 destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks. American fighter losses, 91 aircraft total, 67 to ground fire, 24 to air combat. The kill ratio was 36-1 in air combat. The Zero, which began the war with a 10-1 kill ratio over Allied fighters, ended with a 1-36 ratio against the P-51. It wasn't the Zero's fault. The aircraft was designed brilliantly for 1940 requirements: maximum maneuverability, long range, light weight. By 1945, those requirements were obsolete. Combat had evolved. The P-51 represented that evolution: power, speed, altitude performance, firepower, range. The Zero represented stagnation. Japan lacked industrial capacity to develop better fighters. They produced variants, the A-6M5, the A-6M7, improved incrementally but fundamentally unchanged. The P-51 in 1945 bore little resemblance to the P-51A of 1942. Upgraded engines, better propellers, improved gun sights, increased ammunition capacity, additional fuel tankage, refined aerodynamics, continuous improvement, ruthless optimization. American engineering culture versus Japanese production constraints. The results were mathematically inevitable. The bitter irony: Japan knew this in 1941. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, told Japanese leadership, "I can run wild for 6 months or a year, but after that, I can guarantee nothing." He understood American industrial capacity, had lived in America, studied at Harvard, knew what he was fighting. The invasion of Pearl Harbor was Japan's attempt to cripple American will before American industry fully mobilized. It failed. American will hardened. American industry mobilized. By 1943, America produced more aircraft per month than Japan produced all year. By 1945, America produced better aircraft. The P-51 embodied this disparity. Designed in 117 days. First flight in October 1940. Full production by 1942. Continuous improvement through 1945. Total production: 15,586 aircraft. Cost per unit: $51,000, 1/13 the cost of a B-29. America built them in quantities that seemed insane. America could afford insanity. Japan could barely afford rationality. Lieutenant Colonel Nakajima's final assessment proved prophetic. Written in May 1945, classified by Japanese command, discovered by American intelligence officers in September 1945. The P-51 represents an evolutionary step in fighter design that Japan cannot match with current industrial capacity. The aircraft's combination of speed, range, climb rate, and firepower creates tactical situations Japanese fighters cannot effectively counter. The Zero remains capable of superior turning performance, but American pilots refuse turning combat, exploiting their aircraft's advantages while avoiding its disadvantages. This tactical discipline, combined with overwhelming numerical superiority, creates operational conditions where Japanese fighters can inflict only marginal losses while suffering catastrophic casualties. Unless Japan develops a fighter equal to the P-51 in power and performance, air defense of the home islands will become impossible. As I lack confidence in Japan's ability to develop and produce such a fighter in the time remaining, I recommend focusing available resources on alternative defense methods. The report was filed and forgotten. Japan had no alternative methods, They had kamikaze. They had desperation. They had courage. None of it mattered. The mathematics were absolute. These pilots, American and Japanese, flew the missions their nations demanded. The Americans had better equipment, better logistics, better industrial support. The Japanese had courage and obsolete aircraft, courage lost to engineering. Remember that lesson. Confidence without capability is theater. The Zero dominated for 3 years because Japanese pilot skill exceeded American competence. The P-51 dominated for 6 months because American industrial capacity exceeded Japanese ability to respond. Wars are won by logistics, by production capacity, by the unglamorous mathematics of fuel consumption and engine horsepower. The Zero could still turn in August 1945. Turning didn't matter. Power mattered. America had power to spare. If you want more stories of underestimated forces crushing overconfident powers, subscribe now. Hit like, share this with anyone who appreciates history told raw, and drop a comment telling me which Pacific battle needs this treatment next. These stories matter. These men deserve to be remembered for what they actually did, not what propaganda claimed. Keep this history alive. Subscribe.